The office was quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the occasional rustle of papers on my desk. At 70, I'd grown used to the rhythm of this plasmy place. Hartwell Industries, a name I carved out of nothing but sweat, sleepless nights, and a stubborn refusal to fail. The walls, lined with framed articles and awards, told the story of a man who started with a single truck and a dream, hauling goods across state lines in the blistering heat of summer and the biting cold of winter. 40 years later, that dream had become a logistics empire, a beacon of grit and glory. But tonight, those walls felt like they were closing in. I leaned back in my leather chair, the same one I'd bought when we landed our first major contract. My hands, rough and lined with age, rested on the polished mahogany desk. Across from me sat Daniel, my son, 35 and brimming with a fire I recognized too well. His jaw was set, his eyes sharp, but there was something else in them, something that hadn't been there when he was a boy running through the warehouse, laughing as he pretended to steer one of the forklifts. Defiance. That's what it was. And it cut deeper than I cared to admit. "Dad, you're holding us back," Daniel said, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "This company needs to evolve. We can't keep doing things the way you did in the 80s. The world's changed." I took a slow breath, my fingers tightening around the armrests. The world may have changed, son, but results don't lie. This company's still standing because of the way I do things. Reliable, honest, built to last. He scoffed, leaning forward, his tie slightly askew. "Reliable? You're stuck, Dad. We're losing contracts to competitors who've gone digital, who've automated their fleets. If we don't adapt, we're done. I've been telling you for years, cloud systems, AI routing, green tech. That's the future." I studied him, this boy I'd raised, now a man with his own ideas. I'd given him everything: private schools, a corner office, a seat at the table. I'd built this company for him, for our family. But his words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they dismissed everything I'd poured my life into. "And what about the people, Daniel? The drivers, the warehouse crew, the folks who've been with me since the beginning. You want to replace them with machines." "It's not about replacing them," he shot back. "It's about efficiency. You're too sentimental. This isn't your business anymore. It's bigger than you." The air seemed to thicken, the weight of his words settling like a stone in my chest. "This isn't your business." I repeated the phrase slowly, tasting the bitterness of it. "I started this company with nothing but a beat-up truck and a loan I couldn't afford. Every brick in this building, every deal we've closed said it's mine. And you think you can tell me it's not?" Daniel's eyes didn't waver. "You're not hearing me. I'm trying to save it." I stood, my knees protesting the movement. At my age, every motion carried the echo of decades spent working, lifting, building. I walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling warehouse below, lit by the soft glow of sodium lights. The trucks were lined up, ready for the morning haul. My trucks. My legacy. I turned back to him. "You think you can save what I built by tearing it apart?" He stood too, matching my height, his voice rising. "I'm not tearing it apart. I'm dragging it into the present. You're the one clinging to the past." The argument stretched on, each word a brick in the wall growing between us. I wanted to reach across that desk, grab him by the shoulders, and shake him until he understood what this company meant not just to me, but to the hundreds of families it supported. But he was my son, and love makes you hesitate, even when you know you shouldn't. By the time the clock struck midnight, we were both exhausted, our voices hoarse. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his face a mix of anger and something softer, maybe regret. You need to trust me, Dad. Let me take the lead. I looked at him. My only child. The boy I'd carried on my shoulders through the warehouse. The man I'd hoped would carry this forward. But his words echoed in my mind. This isn't your business. And in that moment, I made a decision that felt like tearing out a piece of my own heart. Daniel, I said, my voice low but steady, if you think this isn't my business, then you don't belong here. You're fired. His face froze, the defiance draining away, replaced by shock. What? You heard me, I said, the words tasting like ash. Get out. He stared at me, searching for a sign I didn't mean it. But I did. God help me. I did. The next morning, the office felt emptier, though nothing had physically changed. The same coffee pot gurgled in the break room. The same hum of activity drifted up from the warehouse floor. But Daniel's absence was a void I couldn't ignore. I sat at my desk, staring at the spot where he'd stood last night, his words still ringing in my ears. This isn't your business. I'd built Heartfelt Industries for him, for our family's future, and now I'd cast him out. The decision sat heavy, like a stone I couldn't dislodge. I tried to focus on the day's tasks, reviewing shipping schedules, signing off on payroll, but my mind kept drifting. I remembered the first time I brought Daniel to the warehouse, barely 5 years old, his eyes wide as he watched the trucks roll in. He'd clung to my hand, asking 100 questions about how the cranes worked, why the drivers wore those orange vests. I'd laughed, ruffling his hair, proud of his curiosity. Back then, I'd imagined him taking over one day, carrying the Heartfelt name forward. Now, that dream felt like a betrayal. By noon, the news had spread. My assistant, Margaret, a woman who'd been with me for 20 years, knocked softly before entering. Her face was tight with concern. Mr. Heartfelt, is it true? About Daniel? I nodded, not trusting my voice. She hesitated, then set a stack of papers on my desk. The staff's talking. They're worried. Some of them think, maybe you were too hard on him. Too hard, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He told me this company isn't mine. After everything I've done, everything I've built. Margaret's eyes softened. He's your son, Arthur. He's young. He's got ideas. Maybe too many. But he loves this place. You know that. I looked away, my jaw tight. She wasn't wrong. But love wasn't enough, not when it came with disrespect. I'd spent 40 years building something real. Something that stood for more than profit margins and fancy tech. Daniel's vision is AI. His automation felt like it erased all that. Like it erased me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I met with department heads, signed contracts, and fielded calls from clients. But every conversation felt hollow. By evening, I found myself wandering the warehouse, something I hadn't done in years. The air smelled of diesel and cardboard, a scent that had always grounded me. Workers nodded as I passed, their faces a mix of respect and unease. They knew about Daniel. They knew what I'd done. I stopped by one of the loading docks, where Eddie, a driver who'd been with me since the early days, was checking his rig. He was 62, his hands calloused from years of gripping the wheel. Evening, Mr. Heartfelt, he said, tipping his cap. Eddie, I replied, leaning against a crate. How's the old beast treating you? I gestured to his truck, a model we'd kept running longer than most companies would have bothered. She's a fighter, he said with a grin. Like you. I chuckled, but it didn't reach my eyes. You hear about Daniel. His grin faded. Yeah. Tough call, boss. But I get it. This placates your heart. Can't let nobody, not even family, mess with that. His words should have comforted me, but they didn't. I thought of Daniel's mother, Ellen, gone 10 years now. She'd have known what to say, how to bridge the gap between us. She'd always been the one to soften my edges, to remind me that family was more than a name on a building. But she was gone, and I was left to navigate this alone. That night, I drove home to the house we'd shared, a place too big for one old man. I poured a glass of whiskey and sat in the living room, staring at a photo on the mantel. Ellen and Daniel, taken at his college graduation. He'd been so proud that day, his smile wide, his future bright. I'd been proud too, thinking he'd take Heartfelt to new heights. Now, I wondered if I'd just destroyed that future. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Daniel. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to hear his voice, to fix this. But another part, the part that had built an empire from nothing new, I couldn't back down. Not yet. I let it go to voicemail. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between Daniel and me grew louder. I threw myself into work, hoping the routine would dull the ache. But every corner of Heartfelt Industries reminded me of him, his empty office, the chair he used to sit in during board meetings, the way he'd argue with me over coffee about fleet upgrades. I'd always admired his fire, even when it clashed with mine. Now, that fire was gone, and I was the one who'd snuffed it out. The company wasn't the same either. The staff moved cautiously, like they were walking on eggshells. Whispers followed me down the hall. Some thought I'd been too harsh. Others that Daniel had crossed a line. The truth, I suspected, lay somewhere in the middle, but I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. One afternoon, I got a call from a major client, Transglobal. They'd been with us for 15 years, a cornerstone of our business. Their CEO, Linda Carter, didn't waste time on pleasantries. Arthur, we're reviewing our contract. Your competitors are offering automated tracking systems and lower rates. We need to see some modernization, or we're out. Her words hit like a punch. Daniel had warned me about this, about losing ground to companies that embraced tech. I'd brushed him off, called it a fad. Now, it was staring me in the face. We're working on it, Linda, I said, my voice steady despite the churn in my gut. Give us a month. I hung up, my hands shaking. For the first time in years, I felt the ground shifting beneath me. Heartfelt had survived recessions, fuel crises, labor strikes. But this was different. This was the future knocking, and I wasn't sure I could answer. I called a meeting with my senior team, determined to prove we didn't need Daniel's ideas to stay afloat. But as we discussed upgrades, new software, better routing systems, I realized I was out of my depth. The jargon flew over my head, and the younger managers exchanged glances, their frustration barely hidden. They needed someone who spoke their language, someone like Daniel. That night, I went to the warehouse again, seeking the comfort of its familiar chaos. I found Eddie at the same dock, tinkering with his truck. You look like you're carrying the world, boss, he said, wiping grease from his hands. Maybe I am, I admitted. Transglobal's threatening to walk. Says we're behind the times. Eddie nodded, his face thoughtful. Sounds like something Danny would have had a fix for. Boy was always talking about fancy tech. I winced at the mention of his name. Yeah. Well, he's not here. Eddie didn't reply, just gave me a look that said more than words could. I walked away, the weight of his silence heavier than any lecture. At home, I listened to Daniel's voicemail from weeks ago. His voice was raw, angry, but there was something else hurt. Dad, I can't believe you'd do this. I was trying to help. Call me back. I hadn't called. Pride, stubbornness, fear, whatever it was. It kept me from picking up the phone. The next day, I drove to the old warehouse on the edge of town, the one we'd used before we could afford the big one. It was mostly storage now, filled with dusty crates and memories. I walked through the aisles, remembering the early days when it was just me, Ellen, and a handful of drivers. We'd been a team, a family. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of that. I found an old photo tucked in a crate, one I hadn't seen in years. It was Daniel, maybe 10, sitting in the driver's seat of my first truck, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. I'd been so proud of him then, so sure he'd carry on what I'd started. Now, I wondered if I'd pushed him away for wanting to do just that. I drove home with the photo in my pocket, my mind racing. For the first time, I considered that Daniel might have been right, not about everything, but about enough. The company needed to change, and I couldn't do it alone. But admitting that meant facing what I'd done, and I wasn't sure I was ready. The boardroom was packed, the air thick with tension. I'd called an emergency meeting to address TransGlobal's ultimatum. The senior team sat around the table, their faces a mix of worry and expectation. I stood at the head, my hands clasped behind my back, trying to project the confidence that had carried Heartfelt through decades of challenges. But inside, I was unraveling. We've got 30 days to show TransGlobal we can compete, I said, my voice steady. They want modern systems tracking, routing, the works. I need ideas, and I need them fast. The room erupted in suggestions, most of them echoing Daniel's proposals from months ago: cloud-based logistics, AI-driven route optimization, eco-friendly fleets. I listened, nodding, but each word felt like a reminder of my son's absence. I'd fired him for pushing these same ideas, and now I was asking for them. The irony wasn't lost on me. After the meeting, Margaret pulled me aside. Arthur, you know who could have handled this. Why don't you call him? I shook my head. It's not that simple. It is, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You're both stubborn as mules, but this company's bigger than your pride. And so is your family. Her words stayed with me as I drove to the cemetery that evening. It had been a while since I'd visited Ellen's grave. The headstone was simple, her name etched in elegant script. I knelt, brushing away a few stray leaves. I messed up, Ellen, I whispered. I thought I was protecting what we built, but I pushed him away. Our boy. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I could almost hear her voice, soft and steady, telling me to fix it. Ellen had always believed in second chances, in the power of love to mend what pride broke. I stood, my resolve hardening. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but I could try to make it right. The next day, I called Daniel. It went to voicemail, as I'd expected. Son, it's me, I said, my voice rough. I was wrong. We need to talk. Please. I hung up, unsure if he'd even listen. Days passed with no response. I threw myself back into work, overseeing the implementation of the new systems. The team was moving fast, but I could see the gaps: technical expertise we didn't have, decisions that needed someone with Daniel's vision. I hired consultants, but they weren't him. They didn't know Heartfelt like he did, didn't carry its legacy in their bones. One evening, I found myself back at the old warehouse, drawn there like a moth to a flame. I wandered the aisles, the photo of Daniel still in my pocket. I pulled it out, tracing the edges with my thumb. That boy, so full of dreams, was still in there somewhere. And so was the man I'd raised. The one who challenged me because he believed in this company as much as I did. I was about to leave when I heard footsteps. I turned, half expecting a security guard, but it was Daniel. He stood at the end of the aisle, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. "Margaret said you'd be here," he said. I nodded, my throat tight. "I didn't think you'd come." He shrugged, his eyes scanning the warehouse. "This place, it's home. Even if you don't want me here." "That's not true," I said, stepping closer. I was wrong. Daniel. I thought I was protecting what I built, but I was protecting my pride. This company needs you. I need you. He looked at me, his expression softening, but there was still a wall between us. "You fired me, Dad. You threw me out of our legacy." "I know," I said, the words heavy, "and I'll carry that regret for the rest of my life. But I'm asking for a chance to make it right." He didn't respond, just looked at the photo in my hand. For a moment, we stood there, two men bound by blood and history, trying to find a way back to each other. Daniel didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. He just nodded, his eyes lingering on the photo before he turned and walked out of the warehouse. I watched him go, the weight of our conversation settling over me like a fog. I'd opened the door, but it was up to him to walk through it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Back at the office, I threw myself into the modernization plan with a new sense of purpose. The consultants were making progress, but it was slow, and TransGlobal's deadline loomed. I found myself second-guessing every decision, wondering what Daniel would have done. His absence was a constant reminder of how much I'd taken for granted his knowledge, his passion, his belief in a future I'd been too stubborn to see. One morning, Margaret burst into my office, her face lit with excitement. "Arthur, you need to see this." She handed me a tablet, a proposal open on the screen. It was detailed, comprehensive, outlining a complete overhaul of our logistics systems, cloud integration, AI routing, even a plan to transition half our fleet to electric trucks. At the bottom, in bold letters, was Daniel's name. "He sent it last night," Margaret said. "Didn't say a word. Just emailed it to me." I read through the proposal, my heart pounding. It was everything he'd been pushing for, refined and polished, tailored to Hartwell's needs. He'd included a section on retraining programs for our drivers, ensuring no one was left behind. It was a vision that honored the past while embracing the future. It was Daniel. I called him immediately. This time, he answered. "You got the proposal," he said, his voice flat. "I did," I replied. It's brilliant. Son, why didn't you tell me you were working on this?" He was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't sure you'd listen." The words stung, but I deserved them. "I'm listening now," I said. "Come back, Daniel. Help me make this happen." There was a long pause, and I held my breath, fearing he'd say no. "I'll think about it," he finally said. "But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the company, for the people who depend on it." "Fair enough," I said, a small smile breaking through. "Just come to the office tomorrow. We'll talk." He showed up the next day, dressed in a sharp suit, his face a mix of determination and caution. We sat in my office, the proposal spread out between us. For the first time in months, we talked as partners, not adversaries. He explained the tech, broke it down in a way I could understand, and I shared my concerns about the human cost. Together, we started to find a balance. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Daniel took charge of the modernization, working late into the night, rallying the team. I watched him, proud and humbled. He was everything I'd hoped he'd be: smart, driven, and, despite his words, fiercely loyal to the Heartwell name. But I knew I had work to do, too. I'd broken something between us, and trust, once lost, isn't easily regained. One evening, as we reviewed the final plans for Transglobal, I stopped him. "Daniel," I said, my voice low, "I'm sorry. For what I said. For what I did. You were right about a lot of things, and I was too proud to see it." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I was wrong too," he said after a moment. "I shouldn't have said what I did. This is your business, Dad. I just want to make it better." I nodded, my throat tight. "We'll do it together." The morning of the Transglobal presentation arrived, and the office buzzed with nervous energy. Daniel and I had spent weeks preparing, blending his vision with the values I'd built Heartwell on. The boardroom was packed: our team, Transglobal's executives, and a few key clients who'd caught wind of the changes. I stood at the front, Daniel at my side, his laptop open to the sleek new system he'd designed. I started the presentation, my voice steady as I outlined Heartwell's history, our commitment to reliability, our loyalty to our people. Then I handed it over to Daniel. He stepped forward, confident but not cocky, and walked them through the future: real-time tracking, optimized routes, a greener fleet. He spoke with a passion that reminded me of myself at his age, but with a clarity I'd never had. The room was rapt, and when he finished, there was a moment of silence before the applause broke out. Linda Carter approached us afterward, her smile genuine. "Arthur, Daniel, I'm impressed. This is exactly what we needed to see. We're staying with Heartwell." I shook her hand, relief flooding through me, but my eyes were on Daniel. He'd done it. We'd done it. Together. That evening, we celebrated at the warehouse, a tradition from the early days. The staff gathered, music playing over portable speakers, pizzas spread out on folding tables. Eddie raised a soda can and a toast. "To Heartwell," he said, "and to the Heartwells." Everyone laughed, but Daniel and I exchanged a look. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be. There were still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. But for the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same team. Later, as the party wound down, Daniel and I stepped outside. The night was cool, the stars bright above the warehouse. "I'm proud of you, son," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I always have been." He looked at me, his eyes softer than they'd been in a long time. "I'm proud of you too, Dad, for building this, for letting me back in." I put a hand on his shoulder, the gesture awkward but sincere. "This company's yours now, too. Always was." He nodded, and we stood there, father and son, looking out at the trucks that carried our name. Heartwell Industries would move forward, not because of me or Daniel alone, but because of what we could do together. I thought of Ellen, of the family we'd built, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change never is. But as I looked at Daniel, I saw more than my Sony saw: the future. And it was brighter than I'd ever imagined.